So, welcome everybody to Integrate Yourself. I'm your host, Allison Pillow, and you can find me at pureenergypdx.com. Today, I'm here with a really great guest. Her name is Kate Swoboda. She is creator of yourcourageouslife.com, director of the Courageous Living Coach certification at teamclcc.com, and author of The Courage Habit: How to Accept Your Fears, Release the Past, and Live Your Courageous Life. She helps individuals, teams, and companies see where old fear-based habits have kept people stuck or started to limit what's possible for an organization, and then start creating more courageous lives by getting into the courage habit, a 4-part process for behavioral and organizational change. Kate has appeared in Mind Body Green, Entrepreneur, USA Today, Forbes, Lifetime Moms, The Intelligent Optimist, Business Insider, and more. And her website, Your Courageous Life, was named a top 50 blog for happiness by Greatest. She's spoken at conferences and seminars on the topic of courage, and as it relates to personal development, releasing overwhelm, business and marketing, money mindset, wellness, increasing emotional resilience, and healthy goal setting using habit formation techniques, and like we're going to talk about today. So thank you so much, Kate, for coming on the show. I'm so glad you're here. I have been recommending your book to just about everybody I know, especially my clients, because I feel like it's a really great foundational tool for them to bring about a different kind of awareness about themselves, about how they see themselves, what they're doing to sabotage what their progress or any kind of accountability or self-responsibility that they're not really facing, and doing the things that they really need to be doing in order to get healthy and to stick with and be consistent with certain aspects of life to find that success. So I really, really appreciate you so much for writing that book. And I have to say, I've reading it as well really brought me to some deep realizations within myself and some things I was doing that I didn't even realize were like fear patterns, as you put it. So as we go, like, I'd love to talk more about those, because that was really kind of my favorite part of the book, was the fear pattern part, where you were like, yeah, like sometimes when you're doing things like having a scattered mind, or being forgetful, and they of course related to certain kind of personality types, which I felt I was all of them. I was like, yeah, that's me. I've been there, been there. I couldn't really say like it was just one. So, but yeah, it's just really interesting how the fear patterns kind of manifest in our life. And it sometimes seems like it's a fault, because we're like, oh, we're not, we don't have it together enough. But really it's like a subconscious, like, mechanism that we're creating to avoid some of the things that we don't want to face. So, with that being said, welcome to the show, Kate. And if you wouldn't mind just beginning with a little bit of information about kind of what brought you to this work. And I loved hearing your story as well in the book and some of the things you shared. But if you could share whatever you want with the audience today about how you got started with this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you mentioned, I start in the book talking about what I think is a pretty common scenario, which is being in a soul-sucking job that wasn't really lighting me up. And, relative in particular to your audience, and of course, only in hindsight was I aware of some of this, was completely burning out my entire system, just hustle, work, more work, more work. And the moment when I opened the book was this moment that I see as like a fork in the road moment for myself, and it's totally tied to that burnout. I'm sitting in a meeting, 4:00 in the afternoon on a Friday, right before we're all going to go on Christmas vacation for a couple weeks. It's like, who scheduled that meeting, And I'm sitting in this meeting, and like my colleagues are talking about a project that they wanted to get going in the new year, but to prepare for the project, it would be really important for all of us to take part of our Christmas breaks to like do a little bit to get prepped for it so we could roll it out fast in the new year. And and typical in organizations when people want to roll things out fast too, and it's a committee of consensus instead of leadership with a vision. It was totally like, I'm just sitting here and I was like so tired, and I'd kind of just been waiting to get to Christmas break and have a break. And then here I am, and people are talking about more work, and I can just see it. I can just see that it's going to be sloppy quality from everybody. The project really isn't going to gel right after the new year. It's going to be March at least before anything's rolled out. Not because anybody that I was working with, none of my colleagues were bad, but just because that's how it was going to go. And then it was going to feel like a waste to have spent my break working on it. It was, the whole thing. And so I was so stressed. And, this intuitive voice kind of came up out of nowhere and went, I don't want to do this anymore. And it was like that knowing beyond all knowing. And at that point, I think I really had considered myself a very pragmatic person. The idea that an intuitive voice would come to me in a meeting, I mean, come on, that's so like, that's how I would have been then. But as it happened, it was just like an incredible gift to have connected with that moment. But it was also a really scary moment because I was so acutely aware walking out of that meeting that day, going into my break, that it's like, well, okay, so if I can know without a shadow of a doubt, I don't want to do this anymore. I got to do something else. I can know that, but like, how do I trust myself then? Because every choice I made led up to right here, and I was hustling and I was working hard, and I thought I was doing all the things to get to right here. So if I did all those things, it's not like I was lazy. It's not like I just landed in this job. It's not like, it's like I literally orchestrated it to get here. So how can this not be the thing that I actually want to be doing? Right. And that was very difficult for me to reconcile initially. And where I landed with it was not at an immediate answer, which is something else I learned about fear and fear patterns, but more so starting from this place of the fear is okay. Like, it's not about I need to hustle and figure out how to not be afraid so that I can go do these things that I think are, are better fit for me. It's about, okay, the fear actually is going to have to be part of this process. I'm not going to get rid of the fear. And that opened up a lot too. And to pull it into today, today being, like I said, wrote the book, The Courage Habit, the research that I've done actually confirms what I experienced at that time, which is that we can't outrun the fear. We often try to avoid it, please it, like that's like pleasing it is in trying to be perfect enough that it won't come up, or attack it. None of those strategies that I've found show up in the research as being effective long-term strategies for fear. Sure, they're going to work in the short term, but they don't work in the long term. And really looking at the habit piece of it, like, how does fear become a habit that runs on default?
Right.
And, any habit can be broken. That's the good news, is that if a habit can be formed, it can be broken, it can be changed, and for the better.
Yeah, that's incredible. And well, I mean, I guess really pushing through things without listening to your feelings are really it's always detrimental to your health and your well-being. And you always end up in this place where you're just like, I'm just not like loving life right now. This sucks, right? I guess that's where a lot of us find ourselves. Like, how did we get here? How did this happen? Like, we maybe didn't notice those patterns, that we constantly do out of just we're in our default mode and how we handle things and survive. But we do have a choice in changing those patterns and those habits, like you say in your book, and you can, by just becoming aware of them, even, starting there.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it, because, in The Courage Habit, I talk about the four predominant patterns being, and you said earlier, I felt like I saw myself in all of them. It was, well, because we all do all of them. It's just usually one hooks us more than the most. And they are perfectionism, people pleasing or martyrdom, pessimism, and self-sabotage. And each of them has their own flavor. And all these years later, and in hindsight, I can so see how perfectionism was really running me big time. That was the thing that was underlying so much of my decision making, including my decisions to keep, ascending a career ladder at a job I really wasn't happy at, because happy was not the metric.
Right.
Perfectionism, does it look good? Is it
Hmm.
impressive? Was
Yeah.
the metric. And sad to say, there was a point in that career where if a colleague had said at 4 o'clock right before Christmas break, let's all spend our Christmas breaks working on a project, I would have been all hashtag hustle,
Yeah.
but,
Yeah.
now it's like, no, 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 it's
Yeah.
gotta be a different way of operating.
Yeah, definitely. I hear you. And I think like perfectionism is a performance, right? So you're performing and you're not really doing it for yourself. You're doing it for other people. In a lot of ways, I feel like,
I think perfectionism, the part where we're doing it for ourselves, is to feel in control. That's where the fear
yeah.
really comes in. It's like, I need to, you know, I like how, I think it's Brene, she said, it's about being beyond judgment.
Yes.
So that's where the safety and the personal piece comes in. Because when people define perfectionism as being about like, um, literally trying to be perfect, like the makeup is done to the tens, and
Mhm.
it's just all like super fancy, keeping up with the Joneses. I've never resonated with that idea of
Right.
perfectionism, but the one that's about trying to be beyond judgment, oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I think I can relate to that too. I'm the same way. It's just about like putting this facade like that I got it. I've
I
got it
got it.
all
I
covered.
got it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I got my shit together. It's okay. But yeah, sometimes it's okay when, it was funny because I can relate to that so much. When I first started training, I had this idea in my head that I wasn't allowed to get sick because I was supposed to
Mm,
health, role model for people. So if I got sick, that was a failure. And I know that sounds ridiculous now when I think about it. I'm human. I'm going to get sick, right? But I had an idea that like, yeah, I'm supposed to be, better than that, right? I'm not supposed to get hurt. I'm not supposed to get sick. I'm supposed to be this healthy like role model for people. And and I had an idea that like if my clients saw me that way, then they wouldn't have as much respect for me.
mm, mm.
So that was a long time ago, but I feel like I've definitely come a long way since then. That is definitely a way that it manifested in my life, as well as many of the other patterns. One pattern that I didn't even think about, that didn't occur to me actually until I read your book, was the scattered brain and forgetfulness one, where it's like you what you do is you kind of you distract yourself with all these other things to do so that you can avoid doing the things that matter most, that will really get you to where you want to go. And it's all that busy work, right? We feel like we're being busy all the time and we're getting things done, but actually we're avoiding what really needs to be done, and we're doing that intentionally, but maybe not we're not maybe fully aware of that, but we're actually doing that intentionally.
Yeah, we're doing it on
Yeah.
autopilot and we don't
Yeah.
even realize it. And then a thing that happens in our culture is like, well, you need to take responsibility for your life. That's a big thing in self-help. And I mean, absolutely, there are behaviors that are running on autopilot without our conscious awareness. And technically we choose them, but we choose them. That this is kind of the root piece of the book to look at is, are you choosing those habits from a place of fear, or are you choosing what you're choosing from a place of courage? Because perfectionism is a fear-based behavior to go into. It is about, as we've been talking about, either an image or trying to have control and be safe. But at the same time, there are absolutely times when I am like in full on hustle mode.
Yeah.
But it's not about perfectionism. It's about, this is really gratifying for me to put all my chips on the table, to actually go, I am all in on this because I believe in it, because I believe in myself, because I'm so excited for what's going to be on the other side of all that hard work. And that is a courageous thing to do.
Yeah.
And people know the difference when I talk about it in those terms, but the point is that there are places in our lives where we go on autopilot and our habits dictate that, and we aren't really in touch with why we're doing something and the intention behind it.
Right. Yeah. Can you give me another example of how that would manifest in some, or what you've seen maybe in yourself and in other people?
Well, with each of the patterns, we've mentioned perfectionism a lot. I suppose because both of us are raising our hands, going like, "Perfectionists here, calling in for duty." Um, the martyrdom pattern, which is about people pleasing, is going to look a lot like always putting other people's needs ahead of your own. I'll pivot a little bit to talking about like food and nutrition, and getting healthy, and the things you need to do that. It could be looking like saving your workout for the end of the day when you're most tired, and then of course once your kids need you, it's like, well, now's not a good time. It could look like you're trying to really make a change in terms of eating habits in your home. And I'm not even talking about rigid ones, but just shifting towards better health. But your partner doesn't really want to do that. And you just go ahead and keep buying him or her the things that you are trying not to eat, that you're trying not to have as a temptation in the house. And it's like there's a real sovereignty that needs to happen for people in that people pleasing mode around, my kids are not supposed to be the be all end all of my life. Like I can actually have priorities that are about me.
Right.
Um, that there's a sovereignty around, if you want the double chocolate chunk cookies in the house, you need to go out and buy them. It's not my job to buy those for you. I'm making a really conscious decision. I'm not trying to be petty. It's just I'm trying to make a different choice. And that
Right.
can feel like a huge piece. Pessimism is another one that comes up. And pessimism is that kind of wet blanket. What's the point? What am I even doing? And that's, probably for most people, like day 2, 3 of a juice cleanse.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Right.
you've seen all the glowing results other people can, or whatever dietary change you're trying to make, or really
Yeah.
even with exercise, you feel sore. So you're like, why am I even doing this?
Yeah.
And what's the point? And going into that mode. And then self-sabotage, technically all of the behaviors, the perfectionism, people pleasing, and pessimism are forms of self-sabotage, but I differentiate in the courage habit a particular flavor of self-sabotage, which is very much about constant shiny object syndrome, not
Right.
setting up your life in such a way that you actually can do the things you want to do. Like if you want to go to bed earlier and get more sleep, well, don't open up your phone or your computer. Don't start the next episode on Netflix. You're sabotaging getting that extra sleep that you want. And self-sabotage is really built on, I took 2 steps in a particular direction so I can coast. So I ate
Oh,
well
yeah.
yesterday, so it doesn't matter if I don't eat as well today. Until, of course, you're digesting the triple chocolate chunk, whatever, and then you're going, that I feel like crap now, and I'm mad at myself because I bailed on a commitment that I had to my health. So all of those behaviors are different sorts of behaviors that manifest. We all do all of them. So listeners are totally going to be nodding their heads, but one of them is usually a bigger hook for someone than the others.
Yeah, I've noticed too that in different phases of my life, I've been more of one than the other. Like for
Right.
example, the martyr, definitely when I was a younger mom, I think I was more of that, and put my kids like and other people a lot more before me, before my own needs for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I love that. That's like my favorite. That's one of the favorite part of my. But then also, because I just was like, oh my God, it just was a different way of just seeing how they manifest, which is just incredible, and it really gives me a little bit more. It makes me feel a little bit more responsible for really the behaviors that I'm even not noticing as much. Like I think for me, sometimes I'll blame like I just can't get organized, or I'm just just have too many things going on, or because I'm, just blame that into why I don't get things done or I'm not doing enough or something. When sometimes I just need to prioritize, and really break it down, like what matters most to me, and then really focus on those things, instead of doing so much multitasking type of
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. I mean, and doing less, that's a part of it
Exactly.
too. It's like not always trying to hustle to make all the things fit. Or if you're going to do that, have an an end point when that won't be the case. Like when I'm launching a book, of
Hmm.
course I'm doing a lot more. Perfectionism though is always going to be going, oh, but you could be doing, oh, but you know, you really should. Oh, well, that's, you know, that's how you know it's
Right.
perfectionism, right? It's like it's
Yes.
always could be doing instead of this is a temporary time period in my life with a set end date.
Yeah, and a big thing now, I think I've heard a lot from people is this like you mentioned keeping up with the Joneses, but the with social media and especially Instagram now, you see people that have these really beautiful lives, and of course we all put the best parts of our lives on Instagram, and then there's some jealousy involved and some not feeling worthy enough or good enough, or feeling that your life isn't like what you dreamt of based on how you're comparing yourself to other people. I kind of feel like that's going on right now too, and so in a way, people just kind of give up and don't feel like they're worthy of having a really beautiful life. Instead of just seeing it as maybe an inspiration for the beauty within them and saying, oh well, this is how I could express my beauty, like they're reminding me, oh, that I could do it that way, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
But I think that maybe just seeing why that's coming up for you could be a start for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it seems like a pretty classic self-sabotage maneuver to know that what people present on Instagram is not the totality of who they are, and yet make it mean that, you know,
Right.
operate from that story, that place. Yeah. And that's really where, you know, when we talk about things being habitual, I'm literally talking about that. You know, habits get thrown around a lot in self-help, but I'm actually talking about brain-based habits, that there's, you know, a part of the brain that controls for habit formation. Of course, the entire brain and the body work together for anything you're doing, but there is a part of the brain that scientists currently understand to be a little bit more responsible for how habits are formed and broken, and it's called the basal ganglia.
Hmm.
And what we currently understand about habit formation is that there's a cue, a routine, and a reward. And a cue is like a trigger, a routine is like a response to that trigger, and the reward is whatever's going to decrease stress. So, in the example of someone who goes into a perfectionist behavior, the cue of stress comes up, they go into perfectionism, and that's the routine. And then the reward is that they feel a little bit more in control. But the reward in such cases with a fear-based habit is only ever temporary. What we're wanting is to know, well, how can we interrupt that pattern? How can we interrupt that habit so that it just doesn't keep repeating itself and create something different? And what I found in the research is that if you interrupt at the point of routine, that's where you exercise the most power. So you're never going to disaster proof your life. So there's always going to be a cue, right? Fear
Right.
happens, intimidation, stress, it happens. You can do things to decrease it for sure. I'm not saying that any part of these can't, you know, isn't a lever you can push, but you'll never perfectly de-stress your life. And it would be inhuman on the other end to not want a reward if you are stressed, right? Like to not
Right.
want, you know, the brain is going to seek resolution. The brain is going to seek a decrease in stress. So the point of influence for each of us is around the routine in the middle. So it's not about having listened to this or read The Courage Habit and you go, that's it. I just won't be a perfectionist anymore. Actually, how it works for most people is you go, that's it. I won't be a perfectionist anymore. And then you go and you be a perfectionist again. But the point is, do
Right.
you notice it? That's what we want you to do, is start getting
Hmm.
conscious and go, oh my gosh, here I go again. I'm people pleasing again. I said yes to that when I definitely didn't want to do it. And the point is, do you get mindful about it? Do you interrupt it when that happens and then go, hold on a minute, I want to choose a different routine? And in the research that emerged from the courage habit, there were 4 particular behaviors that really help people to move away to I'd say like authentically deal with the stress and the fear, you know, not try to
Hmm.
bypass it or avoid it, and certainly not to attack it. And also start building those courageous habits, those emotionally resilient habits that give you more of what you really want in the long term, which is to feel better in your life and feel better equipped to deal with the stress. And so it's about noticing the cue, noticing the fear-based routine, and swapping out that fear-based routine for one of the courage habit behaviors.
Yeah. So let's talk about the courage habit behaviors. What would, for example, if someone was sabotaging, constantly, playing the saboteur role, what would you recommend once they kind of brought that awareness to what they were doing and they're like, oh yeah, what can I replace this with? What can I start? Like, how can I now, navigate my behavior, my habits based on now this new way of being?
So for any of the fear patterns, this is applicable. And then the four behaviors that the research indicated were most helpful were, first, accessing the body, something that I know your listeners are going to be already like, oh yeah, I know that. Accessing the body doesn't have to be just mindful based practices, but you got to do something to access the body, because fear is not logical. It's primal. We feel it. We react based on what we feel, not what we logically know to be true. So accessing the body can also be screaming into a pillow or
Mm.
punching a pillow. Accessing the body can be sitting down and taking time for conscious crying, which is like, how you set a meditation timer for 10 minutes or 20 minutes and then you meditate? Conscious crying is you do the same thing, only you cry. You
Mm.
just go, what am I feeling sad about? What's hurting in the world, in my life? Who do I know who's suffering? And I'm really feeling it on their behalf. And you,
Yeah.
you cry it out. And that's accessing the body.
Yeah, one thing I do with that is I've been actually practicing that myself, just crying and not have any judgment around it, just
Yeah.
just crying. And I think that's important, not to judge why you're doing it, just do it, because it needs to just come through sometimes. So because I have always kind of really suppressed my feelings, I really kind of need to do this sometimes so I'm not slowly creeping back into that mode of being, right? Because I found that I can get into that really easily again. And it's just like, how did I get here again? So um you can put on like a song that makes you cry, and that can start the process. Like, that always works with me, like A Star Is
Absolutely.
Born. Just listen to that soundtrack and that'll get you crying right away. So I mean, just anything that can trigger you into that. Maybe sometimes if you're having problems feeling that, or just sitting down and finding the inspiration to cry, or feeling uncomfortable about it, then put something on that would create that feeling or that emotion to just release. So that I just wanted to add that in. Kind of, that's something I do that really works well.
Yeah, I call it conscious crying because it's not like, I mean, I'm pretty open about all forms of crying be okay, but in particular, like, it's a decision to go, I am going to access my body right now and like really get in touch with that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because suppressing the feelings can be detrimental to your health too.
Yeah, I believe that. And I think the research is emerging more and more that that is the case. Yeah.
So what are some other ways that we can eh, start to learn how to get out of these fear patterns?
Well, one of the things that's really interesting is that I didn't see any research, doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I didn't see any research that said that the way to handle a fear-based thought was to stamp it out. You
Mm.
know, I definitely saw research that was all about listening without attachment, which is what I call the second part of the courage habit process. But nothing about, F fear, kick its ass, any of that stuff. Like
Yeah.
this kind of archetype of your fearless, first of all, does not exist, and then this archetype of like the way to deal with fear is just to tell it to f off or whatever. Not actually effective. What you need to do is you need to listen without attachment. So you listen to
Mm.
what it's saying, even if it's saying you're a loser, what's the point, you got to be better, but you don't attach to that as truth.
Mm.
And perhaps my favorite example to give, particularly to moms, is, sometimes kids get in these temper tantrums and they're like, I don't like you. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, what are you going to make that mean? Like, it's not that your kid literally does not like you in that moment. I'll give you that. But it doesn't mean your kid doesn't love you or is not
Right.
securely attached to you or is not going to be snuggling in your arms probably in about 20 minutes when they chill out, like,
Right.
it is not that you listen to the words, you hear the words, but you don't attach to them as true. And that's a really beautiful outcome that comes out of mindfulness based training as well. And then, really, almost like right on the heels of that, there's reframing limiting stories.
Oh, you're
And I'm
right.
not talking about, positive affirmations. Okay. If positive
Mhm.
affirmations work for someone, great. But I meet a lot of people who are like, positive affirmations, oh my God, they drive me crazy. I feel like I'm lying to myself. Okay, got it. That's how you feel. I can accept that. Um, so reframing limiting stories is actually a technique that is supported by research from narrative therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's about taking a thought that's limiting and going, let me see if I can stretch in the direction of a reframe that feels better. So you're not going from, I'm a loser and what's the point and you never do enough, to I am perfect in every single way and I never do
Mhm.
anything wrong whatsoever. And in fact, I'm going to be like the next, successful multimillionaire who appears on Oprah probably by tomorrow by my manifesting powers. No, we don't do that. What we do is more like, inner critic. You listen to what it says without attachment, and it says you're a loser and you don't do enough. And what you do is you go, okay, so first of all, that's not respectful. I'm open to hearing what you have to say, critic, but it's got to be phrased in ways that I can actually hear. And maybe the critic then is going to do something like, okay, well, you're definitely not living up to your potential. And then you get to reframe in the direction of,
Mhm.
maybe. That's not the
Yeah.
definition of my worth. I'm doing the best that I can. I'm
Right.
taking it one step at a time. So, you pick what you want from
Mhm.
among that panoply of options, but it's reframing in the direction of the vision that you have for yourself in your life. And then perhaps my favorite part of the courage habit process is really the fourth part, which is all about reaching out and creating community. Because
Mm.
especially as a perfectionist, recovering perfectionist, I can go into my space of accessing the body and listening without attachment and reframing limiting stories. But actually talk in the courage habit about a case where I totally was just like in a thing with fear and had no idea that I was in a thing with fear until I met a friend of mine for lunch. And she was like, what's new with you? Da, da, da. I tell her, and she just like laid it out for me, like, Kate, like, this is what's really going on here.
Oh, wow.
And that reaching out and creating community piece is so important because fear thrives in isolation
Mm.
and it diminishes in community. So you've got to create a community around you, real live people, if you can get them in your hometown. And if not, listening to this podcast is part of creating community. You're surrounding yourself
Yeah.
with other people who are going, there's something more for you here, and I believe that you're capable of creating it.
Absolutely. And I think you'll find also that a lot of people are feeling very similar things. We're all going through very similar things and having, similar thoughts about ourselves and then some of us have gone through it already and can give you feedback on it. Cause I remember, you mentioning that one of the stories in your book, what I really related to a whole bunch was that after what I think one of your first workshops that you held, you were feeling like it was a failure, or it was maybe
That's
an
the
online thing.
story. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the story.
And
I was
I
completely like,
was
I did it all wrong, because people weren't, in my estimation, participating the way that I had originally envisioned them participating.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then your friend or your mentor came to you and said, actually, just so you know, this is really good. It was a huge success, and this is based on, I guess the average of what she's seen in her career, and maybe, what you usually get in the workshops, and um as far as participation goes. And you have this vision or this idea of the way you think things are supposed to go, but if you compare it to kind of the average, you may be above average. You don't know, but you don't know until you talk to somebody about it, until you get it out into your community. And so again, like telling ourselves, rewriting this story about how we did, how things went, and then reflecting it with people we know in our community. It's a huge, like you said, you have to get out of that isolation and actually kind of test things out in the world to see how they do. And most of the time what I found is things that you're creating are going to do way better than what you originally like thought, and how you thought they were going to go. It always goes way better in a lot of ways. And if it doesn't, that's okay. You learn from it, and then you maybe do it better, or you move on next time. But yeah, having a community is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Helps you see the things that you might not see, and that helps you to not stay stuck in a pattern.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want to
Absolutely.
know a little bit more about, like, you have these workshops. It sounds like you have worksheets and workbooks that you can go and access on your website. I purchased the book on Audible, but if you purchase the book, the actual paperback, you get access to the
Audios
worksheets
and
and stuff?
worksheets that complement it. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, that's so awesome. And then you have these. How often do you offer your coaching workshops? And then you also train other people to be coaches, right?
Yeah, so coaching workshops can be really variable. And then with running the Courageous Living Coach certification, that is a, once a year kind of gig. So
Mm.
we enroll for, like, we're going to be enrolling for 2020, if you can believe it,
Jeez, yeah.
pretty soon here. So we start enrolling almost a year in advance. Almost every year, the program's doubling in size, and the cool thing about that is that then we bring on more people who practice this work with me so that we can maintain like a really good tight student teacher ratio. And I mean, I say in I say in the acknowledgments for the book, like, we call it a life coaching training program, but like really we're just all about turning people onto their courage. And I like to think of
Mm.
the Courageous Living Coach certification as being about that, because how can you coach other people if you yourself are not really learning and practicing in an active way, in a messy way,
Yeah.
community driven way, some of the tools that you're going to try to help your clients with. So
Hmm. It's
would
essential.
definitely
Yeah.
like a combination of like super rigor, but also I almost want to say super emotionally huggy, like very connected community. Like, you don't
Oh,
have to
yeah.
be a hugger to be
Right.
with us, but like, we get a lot of people, a lot of women healing some mean girls stuff that was left over
Mm.
from high school in our program, and seeing that there's like another way to be with people. And I think they're all integrating pieces of the courage habit into um, their lives. That's part of what we're asking you to do, is to be the client even as you are learning how to be a coach.
Yeah, that's important. You have to heal yourself as you help other people. And I love that you say that women are coming to be more connected to other women and in a healthier way, because that's really what we need to heal our communities. I mean, it's much needed. And I get into some of these women's groups, and people are really pleasantly surprised that women are we're actually supporting each other, which is how it really should be.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I love
I
that.
mean, the chapter on reaching out and creating community was actually the hardest one for me to write
Mm.
in the courage habit. The hardest one for me to, yeah, I went back and forth with my editor at my publisher the most times over that chapter, or it felt that way to me at least. Maybe not. Um, and I think it was because for everything that I was writing, I felt so acutely aware of, I can't just write, you know what, you need to lean in and trust people, because you know what, some
Mm.
people are not trustworthy. They're not
Yeah.
literally worthy of your trust. They do
Right.
not demonstrate behaviors that indicate that they are worthy of your trust. I can't just write a platitude about be courageous, it's okay, if you get hurt you'll pick yourself up. Of course all those things are, in the most technical sense in my worldview, true. You are going to be okay, you can pick yourself up, but there needed to be more nuance to that. And that's part of why in that chapter I really looked at, like, how are people in your life, or people you're wanting to open up to more, currently doing what I call honoring the value of courage?
Mm.
So are they practicing compassion over critique? Because in my mind, anyone who goes, well, I care about you, so I need to give you some tough love. Well, I'll take the love without the side of tough,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
brutal honesty. If you need to be brutal to be honest with me, I don't need your honesty. And
Yeah.
really, a lot of people have a trouble with boundaries. That's an area where people need to practice more courage.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I think having a couple metrics to be able to go, okay, this is how I can see who is and isn't someone who's in my corner is really
Mm-hmm.
important. And what we're trying to do in the Courageous Living Coach certification is actually, the skill set, of course, is important, but we're also trying to create a community so that when people have graduated from our program, they're not just like kind of frittering about into the earth going, oh yes, be courageous, everyone. It's like people actually know that the courage and the connection are all, they're all coming together. It's got to be work that you do yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think as you know yourself better and you use a lot of the tools that you've mentioned and that are in your book, it can only lead to you also attracting and being around more people that are more supportive, because you're not going to put up with the same stuff anymore that maybe you were doing before when you didn't know yourself as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I have another question. Did you get a lot of inspiration from Brene-Brown in your work? I think you mentioned her in your book, right? Or is that true? Yeah,
Well, I think Brene Brown is every life coach's superhero on some
yeah,
level.
for sure. Yeah.
I've interviewed her twice, and she's,
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, an amazing person. And I think the reason that so many of us love her work is that as coaches, many of us were finding all the things that she ended up proving through her research to be
Hmm.
true. So it's like
Right.
there's this period of self-help before Brene is on the scene where, I mean, maybe it was in existence, maybe it was out there, but I don't think it was widely known. But, of like vulnerability is a strength, not a weakness. You
Mm.
need to go into some of these feelings if you're going to find your way to the other side. And this was like a thing that I think coaches were finding in direct experience, or as you might say, clinical experience with a client. But there was almost a kind of, and I think this is probably very patriarchal and an overemphasis on logic over intuition. There was this kind of like, oh yeah, those feelings. Yeah, sure. But then, here comes this incredible powerhouse of a woman who basically says, the research points to this. Beating up on yourself does not work in the short
Right.
term. Beating up on yourself is correlated with health problems and with drug abuse and with divorce. And, it's like, thank you. So
Yeah.
I've actually been doing this work since 2006,
Mm.
which makes me something of an internet dinosaur and maybe even a bit of a life coach dinosaur. And I'm fine with
You
that.
and me both. You and me both, Kate.
There you go. There you go. We can own it.
Yeah.
Hashtag, life coach dinosaur.
Yeah.
Um, so I was doing this work before she was on the scene in such a public way. And I believe she was doing her work at that time. It just wasn't so public until her TED Talk came out and a lot of
Mm.
great stuff started to happen for her. So I would absolutely say that she's an influence. She's just I think a wonderful human being who lives with a ton of integrity and heart and a real willingness to look at her stuff and to not
Yeah.
present as if she's a guru. Yeah.
Right. She's just human. She just
Yeah.
it hasn't really been accepted to be able to feel into your feelings, and to be vulnerable and to do, and look at courage that way until just recently, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Kate. This has been seriously amazing. I'm so glad we connected, and I'm glad you showed me your book, and I read it, and it's just like it's changed my life. Like I
Yay.
said, I'm giving it to all my clients, and it's a part of my recommended reading list now. I've just created a food foundation course that is, a part of my coaching offerings for my clients. And so that's a part of the recommended reading list now. So thank you.
Yay. Yay! I'm so loving that. I'm so
Yeah,
loving that. How I have to do a little Q&A just with your private clients sometime.
that would be awesome. I actually would love that. Yeah. Kate, if you could do me a favor and just share with everybody how they can find you and what you have coming up and what you're offering. I know that you have, uh, we just talked about the book and if you purchase the book, it comes with the worksheets or you can access them online. And I think there's a Facebook community as well, or is that involved with the coaching?
The Facebook community has been on hiatus because
Okay.
the management of the community ended up becoming a thing, and like anybody who's been in a Facebook community is like, oh girl, I know
Yeah.
what you're talking about. Um, but the best ways to take it from here, if someone's interested in the Courage Habit, it's on Amazon, it's in Barnes and Noble, it's all over the place. I find booksellers everywhere. That's what I like to say. And then we've got yourcourageouslife.com for people who are interested in becoming certified to be a life coach, to do what you do, to do what I do. That is the Courageous Living Coach certification at TEAMCLCC.com. And I'd say the biggest place I hang out online, if I'm anywhere these days, is Instagram, where I'm Kate Courageous. I
I
mean, you
love your
can find me other
Instagram account.
places, but yeah.
It's really beautiful, and you put some inspiring quotes every time I look at it. It's like, oh, I love the colors and of course the quotes are and the pictures are all like really pretty. I like it when people create like that, all the color combinations that really go together and it all looks like a piece of art. i
Yeah.
haven't i haven't gotten to that stage on mine yet, so I just mostly try to post some videos and of exercises and beautiful hikes and other like miscellaneous things. But I love it when people like I said, make their Instagram account like so pretty like that. It's really aesthetically pleasing. It's so nice to see. So if you want to check that kind of Instagram account out, then definitely go to Kate's because it's really nice. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank
Okay. Well, thanks, Kate. I really appreciate it again, and you are welcome back on the show anytime. And please keep me in the loop and up to date with what's going on. And
Thanks so much
okay,
for having me.
thank you, Kate. Take care. Thanks a lot.